So
think
today
this,
we're gonna be talking about building quality management capacity at your HIV agency. And obviously, in an hour, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to actually do that. So what we're going to do is spend some time talking about some of the core concepts behind that, some of the different approaches people have used, and then do a breakout where we really want to hear from you how we can best help and work with you over the coming year in terms of building the quality management and quality improvement capacity at your agency. And again, as always, if you have any questions or things, please do put them into the chat box. I can't see it, but I'm hoping somebody else who is co-hosting will be able, Josh, thank you, will be able to see that. And if not, feel free to unmute yourself and just raise your voice. Because again, we'd like to do this as interactive as possible given all the constraints of Zoom. So what are our goals? Our goals are to identify areas where capacity may be needed for quality management and quality improvement, to discuss the input on how and where we should prioritize the work, understand the differing needs based on your service areas, and begin to build on existing strengths and resources and understand where new ones are needed, because there are some of the participants here and we know who've been funded who really bring a tremendous amount of experience as well in some of this work. So in which areas did you identify need? This was sort of the last of the things. There was a culture for QI, for data use and improvement, and this whole idea of adaptive management, which is something that people are now recognizing, and the need for what we call a safety culture. So right now we talk about safety cultures in terms of PPE and preventing COVID and washing hands, but safety culture also is this ability to actually say there's a challenge, to be able to discuss openly that when you're looking at the data, that people are actually not just looking at it, but talking about it and using it. Some of the skills for QI around measurement, as well as data use and quality improvement, building leadership and support for QI, which is a really important thing. You know, not all leaders have to be experts in QI, but they have to be able to understand it. Measurement and defining quality in non-clinical areas, and then anything else. So you can put it in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat if there's other areas that you sort of have come up as you begun to think about this. But again, we're really trying to make sure that what we're doing is really reflecting the needs that you're identifying. So where and how can we help? So there's a couple of things that we've already begun to sort of brainstorm about, but really want to hear from you. So the first and most obvious one is to identify existing resources. HRSA HAB has really invested in quality and quality improvement for quite a few years. There are existing resources, whether it's through Target or through the CQII, formerly known as the National Quality Center, as well as external agencies. To develop a collaborative. So this is people who may have been involved in this in the past. It's a combination of team-based skills building, creating a community of practice, and learning sessions with action periods in between where people are targeting specific things, whether it's improving quality or actually building quality management. Potentially some standalone trainings, for example, by quality management area, measurement, data interpretation and use, potentially by service areas. And then sort of thinking whether it's helpful for some of the sites, whether there should be some site coaching on quality plan or data use and feedback, which I know is an area that the Evaluation Center has really spent an enormous amount of time and experience in terms of how to coach sites to actually do this. So how do you start? How do you even begin to sort of think about this? And the first question really that organizations need to ask themselves is, do you have the infrastructure needed to build and sustain the capacity for QI? Because otherwise it becomes a one-off quality improvement project. Everybody gets excited by it. And then two years later, somebody comes back and they say, so what's happening with that particular area? Nobody has any recollection. And this has happened to me many times. Was one we were doing on measuring vital signs, something very simple. Are you taking blood pressure? And everybody very excited and graphs everywhere and spread. And 2 years later, nobody had any memory of that. So how do you actually think about not just doing, but also building and sustaining? So the question is, why do you need more than QI? Why can't we just do a quality improvement project once a year and just be done with it? And the idea is that really, if you want to plan, implement, and then sustain improvements in quality, the overall program needs this infrastructure for quality assurance and improvement, which is generally called quality management. And so quality management program will support and improve the work that you're doing to improve the quality of care. So it isn't actually the doing the improvement, it's actually supporting it. It's the infrastructure. And so this is actually comes from HIVQual, which was one of the first sort of big investments by HRSA into measuring and improving quality. And the idea is this sort of yin yang of that you have quality improvement that actually feeds into performance measurement that goes around into quality improvement. But underneath it, you need this infrastructure. And so the quality management program and plan really will support that. And any one of these areas may need some capacity building, whether it's the improvement, the measurement, the program, or your sort of overall strategic plan. So what is a quality management program? And so first of all, quality management program is not one person. And often people think of quality as like, oh, that's Josh's job. Like if there's a quality problem, Josh is just going to take care of it. Nobody else has to worry about it. Of a team. And the goal is to build and support the culture of the quality and performance measurement and improvement throughout the program. So it really is looking both at the individual areas, but also more broadly. So what else is needed to support that? It allows for a more systematic approach to measuring and improving quality, and again, can provide the support for or advocate for the support for building the site capacity or the program capacity, depending on sort of where you sit within a larger organization. So the idea of sort of QM program, and if people remember the dual cycles that I did last time, is that similar to a quality improvement project, a quality management program has a cycle as well. So it's not sort of one and done, and now we don't have to worry about it because it's been 10 years and who cares. It really is this idea of sort of ongoing learning. And so you need to include, first of all, to plan and develop your internal quality management program. And that includes who's going to be involved, what kind of resources you need, you know, who else should be involved in that, and then making it happen. So making sure that the program is not just a plan that kind of sits someplace. And then routinely evaluate the quality program. So is it making a difference? Are there new emerging problems coming up or challenges? So it should have a couple of key characteristics. So first of all, it should be systematic, and it should have identified leadership, accountability, and dedicated resources. So expecting people to do this sort of in their lunch hour or sort of on their spare time doesn't usually work. That means you're usually just having to do because the donor says you have to do it. So it really is a question about saying, here's where we're meeting, here's how we're taking notes, we're actually going to do this. And often if you can incorporate it into an existing meeting, that's often a very quick way of getting things started. So when I first started doing this at Dimock Community Health Center, it was like, well, we can't do an extra meeting. And so we said, well, what's a meeting where we actually look across the entire HIV program? Because we had case management, we had housing, we had back to work, as well as clinical. And so choosing one of those and just, you know, half an hour of it, making sure that this was always on the agenda. It obviously should use data and measurable outcomes to determine progress, and these have to be relevant and agreed upon goals. So again, this needs to really get buy-in, and it should adapt it to change. So I would say, again, COVID is perhaps one of the biggest contextual factors I think any of us have ever faced. And so you could certainly continue to sort of march along with what you've been doing, but realize that you're going to need to figure out how to adapt to the fact that a lot of things have changed because of COVID. And then very importantly, ensure the data collected is fed back into the quality improvement process used to measure if the goals are accomplished. And when the RSR used to be called something else. When I first started, we didn't really we had one computer, and all that mattered was that the numbers added up. And so all we cared about was getting it in time and made sure that the columns and the rows all matched. And we never used the data, and the data was never fed back to us by anybody. And I certainly never fed back the data because I was so delighted that we'd gotten the report in on time that was success. And I think, you know, over time, as we really developed a culture of quality improvement, we realized that was really just the start. And so making sure that it's used to inform what the decisions we're making, and then lighter touch for quality improvement projects to see if goals are actually being accomplished. Because as Viju pointed out, it's unlikely that your information systems people are going to be willing to give you weekly feedback on different new things. So it should be able to help providers ensure that services as provided meet the established standards and guidelines. And so that's regardless of what you're doing. So if you don't actually have standards and guidelines, it's a little bit easier for clinical, but for other ones it may not be. You need to figure out how you're going to actually do that. Making sure that the strategies and activities address all the critical components of the services. So often people will just look at, let's just do viral suppression and retention and care. Important, but if you're doing case management, you got to look at case management. If you're doing housing, you got to look at housing. And for people that are, again, working in these organizations that are non-clinical, really sort of thinking, what are the existing metrics and how else do we do them? And then again, ensure the data are being used to monitor who's being served, how well they're being served, and what changes are needed. And this is, again, there's something that I call the tyranny of the mean. So that's when people only look at averages. We're 72%, we're doing pretty well. Almost 3/4 of people are being served. But if that 28% are the people that are the most disempowered, the most disenfranchised, that is not quality. It doesn't have equity involved. So again, as you're thinking about the data, to look not just overall, but change over time, and also understanding who are the subgroups that you might want to be able to take a look at to make sure that you're not actually worsening disparities in care as you're improving care, something which is not uncommonly seen in quality improvement. So for example, a program which has housing, case management, and clinical services, and this was ours, and then we added in back to work as well, because this was at the time when HART was first introduced, and people actually at this point were well enough to get back to work. We had to make sure standards are in place for each service. So for clinical, that was pretty easy. It existed. Case management at that point didn't really have any, and housing and employment didn't have any. So we actually went to non-HIV housing and non-HIV employment to sort of borrow from there. And then we sort of developed some of them. Ensure that your quality measures cover each service. And again, for organizations that only have a single line of service, that's a little bit simpler. For ones which actually have multiple, it can be a little bit complicated because you don't want to measure too many things. And then look where and how the data are being collected. So we already heard about clinical from the electronic medical record is both a benefit, but also a challenge. So it's already there, but getting it might be much more difficult. And there's been some work over time to look at what's called interoperability. So things that can actually pull from the EMR, but those are still, I think, not totally there. And so as a result, sometimes people have their own databases that they're actually using, which I think also has plus and minuses. Often case management data will be in a separate database, and maybe your housing, there's no way of actually collecting it, it's all paper, and so you'll need to develop it. So really understanding what's the landscape within your organization. And again, this is where you can learn from other people, through the community of practice. Hey, does anybody have a good database they're using right now for housing services, as an example? So how do you know where you have strengths and gaps? So you can measure that. This is the organizational assessment tool for that was developed again by HipQual. It's now available either through the National Quality Center or through Target. This is for Part C and D. They also did it for A and for B. This is just one example. And this is to what extent are physicians or other health professionals and staff, so again, this is a little bit biased towards clinical, routinely engaged in quality improvement activities and provided training to enhance knowledge, skills, and methodology. So this talks about the capacity building and institutional culture. And then you can sort of say, what stage am I at? None of my staff have actually routinely engaged, nor are they really encouraged. So we're just getting started. Maybe you're beginning implementation. So maybe it's underway in some of the staff, or maybe actually you're actively implementing it and you actually already have discussions in other areas. So it really gives you a sort of different rubrics for understanding where you are and understanding where the needs for your particular organization. So again, there's tools and guides that are available. And so the idea is that you want to follow a pathway to build capacity. Sometimes I know when I first started doing this, it seemed a bit overwhelming because there were so many different areas, and I'd say do a little of this and a little of that. And the idea is really there is a pathway that one can follow to build this capacity. So the first step, again, is to develop and plan your quality management program. Who are your leaders, key stakeholders, who else needs to be involved? Do you need to form a quality management committee, or do you already have one? Identifying the existing measurements and improvements, developing your HIV quality management plan, and then strategize how to implement the plan. So it really is that initial sort of preparation. A lot of times people want to just dive in. Let's improve something. Sometimes that's okay, but at the same time, you really want to take this first step. So who should be your leaders? Again, who's responsible for the overall quality management? Do you have leadership engagement? So there's the internal leader. This is a leader who's involved in quality improvement. But then again, especially if you're in a larger organization, does the CEO or the CMO even know what you're talking about? Do they believe in it? Will they support you in it? And if not, how are you going to actually convince them? Sort of bringing in some behavior change approaches. And then accountability. So who are the major stakeholders and what are their expectations for the QM program, whether it's performance measurements, the measurement of impact, or reporting. So it might be your donors. Again, might be your CEO, maybe your community advisory board. So who are the people that you need to be communicating with your planning and your next step? Then you want to form this quality management committee or team, and this is, who will be responsible for doing the work, who's responsible for evaluating if it's working well, if it's only a subgroup of your program. So if, for example, you decide that you want to have, you're in a big clinic, and this is the HIV quality management, but there's already one that's overall a clinic, how are you going to integrate that in? If you're decided to do one for housing and one for case management, how are those going to actually talk to each other, or does it make more sense to actually have a combined quality management team? Then you want to understand sort of what are your current activities and resources. So what are your current guidelines and standards? What are other relevant quality activities? So if you're in an organization that's actually doing quality improvement in other areas, it's great to be able to build on that. Even if the person who's doing it has no idea about the area that you're working in, the content, they actually will know some of the methodologies. Where is quality measured? What other data are being collected that you can use? I'm a big fan of making data work really hard. What data are currently being analyzed? Maybe there's reports that are already being generated. And are they related, for example, monitoring and evaluation activities that might be related to other grants or to other required reporting that you might actually be able to use? Then you develop a quality management plan, and we're going to talk about that in the next workshop. But it's basically a written document that outlines the HIV quality program, something that is actually required. And then you want to get started. So, you can spend a lot of times, and a friend of mine who was sort of get organized, get help, get started. And I think those are the 3 steps that we want to think about, is that you want to get organized, but you also want to get help where you need it. And then you don't want to spend too long doing it. You want to get started. So again, you want to establish how you're going to measure things, when and how often are you going to review. I just got off a call which was talking about data use for a different organization, and it's a monthly report. And they said, well, we decided we're going to review our data quarterly. I was like, okay, I understand that, but then why are you collecting data monthly? So how often are you going to review it, and who's going to review it? How are you going to actually decide, and what are you going to do based on the findings? So what are the gaps you want to address? How are you going to support that ongoing work? Very importantly, and people forget about this, celebrating success. So in one of the organizations that I work, at the beginning of every monthly meeting, we would sort of talk about sort of the good, the not so good, and the real problems. They called it the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the idea is that you want people to sort of celebrate success. We decided we were going to work on completion of housing applications, and we've gone from 25% to 60%. So again, it elevates the fact that you're doing this quality improvement. It makes people who are doing it feel like they're being celebrated, and identify where capacity building is also needed because people may be sort of lagging behind. So these are all things which then become sort of ongoing. We did something on data quality, and the first clinic that got a perfect score in that actually got a lunch. So there's other ways of kind of celebrating it, a little bit of competition if people are actually in a network. So then when you're establishing the performance measured, we talked about indicators last time. So this is how you're going to measure. And often with HRSA-HAB, there are ones which you are required to measure. It's always good to start with those and then seeing what else you might want to measure. Again, remember SPARS, they have to be measurable as well as actionable. Again, can you build on what you have? If it's not simple, works to start. So, you could do things in Excel spreadsheets or even on paper, depending on sort of the numbers. So don't wait to build the perfect data. Some colleagues of mine, I do a lot of work globally from Botswana, say, think big, start small, and grow. So you can certainly think big, but often you should start small so you can get started. And establish accountability, who's actually responsible. Again, reviewing your data, something that often people forget to do. So it's not just one person's job, but really to use this for planning. It helps you get focus on the efforts of the QI. And again, how do you sort of get buy-in for this? So how is your culture? Can people talk about gaps? Or is it really sort of not considered? There's a hospital in Cincinnati that's very famous for its quality improvement. And they have, first of all, they call it standing meetings. And it's literally that you are standing during the meeting because it's 15 minutes and they found if people are standing, they can't read their email. That's a little harder, obviously, with Zoom. I guess we could all stand up and sort of hold our hands up to make sure you're not typing anything. But the key thing is that it's a safety culture. So anything that is said in that room stays in that room. I could say something about Las Vegas, but I won't. And it's this idea that people are willing to talk about problems and then talking about solutions. So you have to be careful. It's not people just complaining, but it's sort of saying, okay, I understand that's an opportunity for improvement. What are some of the steps that we actually need to take to figure out what to do next? And that goes back to some of the QI stuff we talked about the last time. Again, you need to then decide when people are going to work on housing and they're going to work on completing the applications, and the other one's going to work on clinical, on rapid start. So you may need to establish some of these project-specific teams. You might be internal, but you might engage external stakeholders. And this is ideal work to include consumers. And there's some very good resources at CQII, including some trainings for this. Deciding the roles and who will lead. Again, they're not the only person responsible. They're simply responsible for making sure everybody gets forward. Establish project goals and activities, and very importantly, determine your timeline. Something that is meant to improve that's going to take you 3 years, there are things which will take 3 years, and you can choose some of those, but also choose some of what we say, what can you start doing by next Tuesday? So things where you can actually move the needle more quickly, and part of that's because you'll get better buy-in, because you'll be able to show people why this is worth an investment. Again, you need to support this by providing training and education, what we're about to go and talk about. Creating routes and procedures for communication. How do you make sure that in your newsletter, this is maybe you get a little corner that's for quality or quality improvement. Recognize the efforts of the staff, again, celebrating program success, and integrate as much as possible into everybody's activity. This is everybody's job. And one of the big successes we had was putting this into everybody's job description. So it's not additional work. This is part of what everybody does. So what does it take? Again, you have your measures, whether they're HRSA or HAB, CDPH, other standing setting groups, or we can generate within our community practice. Keep it simple. A lot of times people will spend a lot of time analyzing it. I do this all the time because I love data, quantitative data. But keeping it simple, making sure you're looking for disparities, and then figure out how you feed this back. So how is it that other people will respond to it? I respond to tables. I would bet you there are other people on this call who will respond to table. Yes, Evaluation Center, I'm looking at some of you. But often there's better ways of doing it with visualizations, keeping it simple. Again, it's sort of like you have 10 indicators. You feel like it's somebody telling you, oh, you have 10 friends, you can only bring 3 of them. Only bring 3 to the party. So only really sort of get people to focus on the ones that you really want them to talk to, and make sure that the way that things are presented it's really a culture of safety and learning. And there's a couple of techniques we can talk about in the future that are learning from coaching about how you sort of use things like observe and concern and question. So it's not like only 20% of people are getting started on treatment. People are dying because you're giving very bad care, as opposed to, I noticed that we're only at 20%, and I'm worried because this could really, mean that the people that we're serving are not doing as well. Let's talk about to understand why that's actually happening. Same message, different delivery. So what's our next steps? To synthesize and plan from your input, and again, we will be touched on that. We're definitely going to start the community of practice just as a way of communicating and really maybe reaching out to people to share. Again, we're going to plan for collaborative focus, and one of the suggestions from our group was to actually have some smaller collaboratives that might first start with clinical and non-clinical, but within them, then it's great to have a range of experience, because then they can actually serve as internal resources. And I might think some of the clinical areas which have a lot of experience, we may bring over as sort of expert people. And then continue to gather the resources, both from us, but also CQII, the HRSA Target Center, and AATC, and we can certainly send that out. The CQII, for example, has a Quality Academy. And so really thinking creatively about what things we can do. So again, just, any questions or comments, since we don't have much time, please do send to us. There is an evaluation form. And so thank you very much in advance for your feedback. Again, we are in somewhat new ground because we're doing this all virtually as opposed to face-to-face, and therefore having to really compress some of the timing just based on Zoom fatigue. So please do give us your feedback. Any other suggestions you have, if you didn't have an opportunity to hear your voice, first of all, apologies for that, and please do include that in the evaluation. And we will be in touch soon.